was trying to figure out what I was going to say about Black History Month, and I could have did it like everybody else. Let's talk about historical characters. Let's do this. Let's do that. But you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna show you this collage. Now, in this collage, you see several pictures from our history of ancestors, of people. I could. Some of them might be famous. Some of them aren't. But they are our ancestors. They are the African Americans who came before us. Our parents, our grandparents, people we don't know. Like I said, these are various pictures. I'm not going to name the names on the pictures, but they come from different times in Black history, and they're important to us. For Black History Month, what I did was I decided to start working back on my family tree again, and I get back as far as my great great grandparents, and it gets blurry. The reason I'm bringing this up is this: it's 2023, and there's a lot of pushback right now by white people, and especially in the South and red states, against what they call CRT, actually, which is an opportunity to ban African American history, the truth about our history, as if our history doesn't matter. And sometimes even how we celebrate history in the United States as if it begins at slavery. But for black people, history began in Africa. There's a gap. The first banning of black history was what happened when we came over here on the boats. When they brought us here in the Middle Passage from Africa, from the coast of Ghana, from the coast of Benin, and places like that. That was the first banning of black history because they stripped us of everything. They tried to change our language. They even mixed people together with different languages so that they wouldn't be able to get together and communicate and rebel against what they were about to do. Then they gave them a name: Toby, John, Mark. No last names. I bear the last name, and this is not to any shame because now it's my last name, but I bear the last name of the people who once held my family captive. My last name is Binion. I trace my family back, starting with my grandparents in Cookeville, Mississippi. In Noxubee County, I find that there's two names: George Binion and another Binion. Both of them were slave owners. They're on the plantation, one with 44 slaves on it, the other one with 22. So they weren't poor by any imagination. This is before the Civil War. Their last name was Binion. So I know where my last name comes from. I start tracing my family line, and I get to my great-grandparents, then to my great-great-grandparents. And when I see that they were born in the 1820s in South Carolina, there's still a lot to ask. Because my folks started out in Mississippi, now they're in South Carolina. But I find that the paperwork shows that my great-grandfather lived in that house. So that was his father or his grandfather, because he was born in the 1860s. And his father was born in the 1820s. That's a huge disparity in time. So there may be a been a fact that one of them was either born earlier or later. And of course, this is just the record that's there that I found. It may be incorrect, but it's a fight to find that information, because before the end of slavery, black people were just registered as part of a household, one name on the list of number of slaves, and you don't know which one of those slaves were related or had children. It's a lot that goes into how those records are kept, because black people were seen as property. Yet, our black history is important to us. Even with that gap between the time we went to Africa and the time we're here. And we can talk about all the things we know about those markets in South Carolina that our folks came from, those markets where they bought and sold you, and then they pushed you out to other places. What they call the Black Friday markets, where they pushed you out to places like Delaware, Kentucky, Missouri, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, Georgia, Texas, slave states, where slavery existed. But, and even then, I could have had ancestors that were split off that went to other plantations that now have different names, and I may be related to them and not know that. Then the line gets blurred even further as families were broken up. Let's say your mother was this is just for example. A mother had 3 babies or had a baby. She was only allowed to be with that baby until that baby got to a certain age. Then they split them up and they either sold that child or sent them to another plantation. And that mother was no longer allowed to be with her child. The men were often set aside as breeders, so they went from one household to the next. If they didn't actually get married, in some cases they did. When they did get married, the owner would sit there and look and see how many children they got and take children away from that household to be sold. So our history gets muddled and divided and pushed around and taken in different directions. And so that's just why I want to talk about history now. Now we've got people now who want to ban CRT because they don't want to tell the truth about the history that's already confusing enough for black people who are trying to get it together. Like I said, before black people, before our families came over here and were turned into slave places, were held captive. These are free men, so I'm going to say held captives, not slaves. Slave is a word that the white people put on us. We were not slaves. We were captive, held captive. We were hostages, forced to work. But I will say this. You hear stories about the great Mansa Musa. You hear stories about Ghana. You hear stories about the great Zimbabwe, Egypt, the Congo, Empire of Congo. You hear about all of these great societies and the people of Benin, the women warriors of Benin. And you hear about all of this and you realize there's more to African American history than just what they try to spoon feed us during Black History Month. It's extensive. It's large. It's huge. We hear about all the towns that were wiped out. We heard about what happened in Tulsa. We hear about what happened in Wilmington, South Carolina. We hear about what happened in Rosewood. How they tried to wipe us off the map when we were trying to build something for ourselves in our current history. We hear about towns that are underwater, like under Lake Martin. There used to be a thriving black town there. It was when they built the dam, the Logan Martin Dam, it flooded that town and those black people were removed from that town. We hear about Central Park and Seneca Village that used to be in Central Park that was taken away to make Central Park. Thriving black communities that were wiped off the map. It's 2023 and we're still trying to do the same thing. Trying to make black people irrelevant in this society. We built things. We are a part of the history of this community. Everything about us is part of the history of America. So they can't really wipe us out, but they're trying. I think about what Ron DeSantis keeps saying about he's trying to stop the woke. And what he's really doing is trying to put to sleep Black history, Black pride, Black history of resistance against the system that has treated them so unjustly for more than 400 years. And they hate that word. And see, people now don't get it because if in 1963 you do a survey and 80% of white people think that black people have equal opportunity in this country, and that was in 1963, you can just imagine why they still think the same way in 2023. Well, now you've got the Civil Rights Bill. You got affirmative action. You got voting rights. And we see what's happening across the country with that. We just saw what happened in Mississippi when they just decided to make an all-white voting district. White people will always show their power because they feel slighted when you tell them that there was a wrong done. Even if they weren't the ones that did the wrong, they somehow feel like it's against them. Because when you talk about, well, the police did this and they're doing this against black people, the first thing I always get is, I don't see color. Okay, we weren't talking about you. We were talking about what happened to these black people. We were looking for you to understand and have sympathy for what happened to these people. But what you give me instead is, I don't see color. I don't really pay attention to racing. I don't, and you don't. I get that you don't. Then I get this, why do we have to have a Black History Month? Isn't all history important? Why is it important that you have a Black History Month? Why do we have HBCUs? All those are microaggressions. Microaggressions. Against not understanding why we are in the situation we are, not understanding history the way you should, by putting a blinders on and keeping up the hypocrisy of what the United States and the propaganda you were taught from a child about what the United States is. Be a patriot at all times. America's about freedom and liberty. Even though only 16 of the people who signed the Declaration of Independence did not own slaves, and most likely those 16 people profited from the slavery, that the slaves that the other people on that Declaration of Independence signed. Black history is everything. I can talk about W.D. Du Bois. I can talk about George Washington Carver. I can talk about all the great authors and musicians that we had in our history. But then we would forget the history of the people who just lived. The black farmers, field hands, the carpenters, the sailors who worked on ships. Black people who did all these things for America. We would forget them because we're so focused on trying to make everybody else see us as something great when we were great just by what we did every day. And that's what we got to understand about being African American. That's real. I put that focus on that because that's what's real. This is a month dedicated to the history of a people who needs to know the entirety of their history. I'm sad to say there's a lot of black people who don't even understand Dr. Martin Luther King. Don't really know Malcolm X. They quote him, but they don't know him. They don't really know Marcus Garvey until somebody like Dr. Umar Johnson tells them. A lot of people don't like to read books. They don't like to pick them up. They go by what their grandparents tell them. They go by what their next door neighbor tells them. They go by. That's what they go by. I like reading about people. Malcolm X was more militant than Dr. King was, but Dr. King started moving towards Malcolm X, and Malcolm X started moving towards Dr. King towards the end of their lives. Malcolm X came to realize that we live in a world where we have to live in a community where we need to learn to get along. Where Dr. Martin Luther King learned that it's more than just getting along. It's a fight for black people. And it has always been a fight for black people. It always will be a fight for black people. We are 12% of a population. White people are currently the majority, and that's about to change. And our situation is about to change. If white people become the minority and the majority becomes Latino in this country, they won't understand our situation with slavery or understand our fight against slavery as did the black-white community, because they're going to say, well, we weren't part of it. That's why our history is important. That's why it's important for us to learn our history. It's important for other people to learn our history. That history is so important to everybody because our history is a part of everybody else's history. Not just a few people they like to push out and talk about how they impacted the world. And it's great. They did impact the world by the things they did. But every man impacted this world. The guy working at the black man working at the steel mill, the black man working in the mines, the black man sweeping the floors in banks and restaurants, the guy in the elevator. They all matter. Black history is huge. Our grandparents, our great-grandparents, how they contributed to us being here today, that is what matters. So, folks, please remember, when you celebrate Black history, you celebrate everything about us. Peace.
You have been listening to Thought You're Woke, No Speed Limit Podcast.